The sun was just beginning to dip behind the low Texas hills, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of the small town. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and hot asphalt. From down the main road, the deep growl of motorcycles approached, echoing off the brick storefronts and empty sidewalks. A group of Hell's Angels thundered into view, leather jackets creaking and chains clinking as they rolled past. Most people would have stepped back, crossed the street, or hurried into their homes. But on the curb near the corner store, a young girl sat alone, oblivious to the rumble of engines, her knees drawn to her chest. Her cheek was bruised, a dark purplish mark that hinted at recent pain. Her eyes were fixed on the cracked pavement, tracing patterns in the concrete like it might hold some kind of answer. She flinched as the bikes rumbled closer, expecting laughter or leers, but then one of them slowed down, the roar of the engine fading slightly as it neared her. Jake was a man built like a wall, covered in tattoos that traced stories of decades on the road. His leather jacket had seen better days, faded and worn, but his eyes carried a softness few people noticed at first glance. Something about the girl made him pull up beside her, parking his bike just far enough to give her space but close enough to be present. He cut the engine, letting the silence stretch for a moment, giving her a chance to breathe. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice low but careful not to scare her away. The girl flinched, surprise and fear mingling in her eyes. Most strangers avoided people like her or worse, took advantage of them. But Jake didn't step closer. He didn't make sudden movements. He just stayed there, a giant presence on the curb, asking a question with genuine concern rather than judgment. She hesitated, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. The bruise throbbed painfully, a reminder of anger and fear from earlier that day. The sun dipped lower, bathing the street in golden light, and for a brief moment, the chaos of the town seemed far away. She started, then stopped. Words caught in her throat. She had learned early not to trust easily, not to speak her truths to anyone, not even to herself sometimes. Jake waited, patient, the hum of distant motorcycles fading into background noise. Finally, she whispered, almost too softly for him to hear, "I fell." It wasn't the whole story, but it was enough to start. Jake nodded slowly, accepting the partial truth without pressing. He knew the value of a silent witness, of someone just being there. He reached slowly into his bike bag, producing a small bottle of water and a granola bar, setting them on the curb beside her. "Take your time," he said, voice steady. "You're not alone right now." For the first time that day, the girl allowed herself a small breath of relief. The leather-clad biker wasn't a threat. He wasn't an intruder. He was a pause in her chaos, a sliver of unexpected kindness in a world that had been harsh. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the street in a warm amber glow, a fragile connection was formed. One that could change the course of her evening, maybe even her life. The girl stared at the bottle of water and the granola bar, unsure whether to take them. Jake didn't rush her. He stayed crouched on the curb, his massive frame softened by the careful distance he kept, his eyes calm and steady. Around them, the street was quiet now, the other bikers having moved on, leaving only the hum of distant engines and the occasional bark of a dog. Thanks, she muttered, finally picking up the water. Her fingers trembled slightly as she twisted off the cap and took a cautious sip. The granola bar remained untouched for now, a small symbol of trust she wasn't ready to give. Jake nodded, saying nothing, letting her set the pace. After a long moment, she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. It was my dad," she said. "He got angry. I didn't mean to." She trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. The bruise on her cheek pulsed painfully with the memory. She had tried to hide it from everyone, to pretend nothing had happened, but now the truth clawed its way out. Jake didn't flinch or recoil. Instead, he leaned back slightly, giving her space but keeping his attention entirely on her. "You don't have to explain everything," he said gently. "I just want you to know, it's not your fault." The words were simple, but they carried weight. For years, she had been told that she deserved the anger, that her mistakes justified punishment. Hearing someone, especially a stranger, say otherwise sent a strange warmth through her chest. Slowly, she uncrossed her arms, allowing herself to sit a little straighter. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, curiosity mingling with disbelief. "Most people, they just walk away." Jake smiled faintly, A quick flash that revealed the man beneath the tattoos and leather. "Because someone helped me once when I had nothing," he said. "I just try to pass it on." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The sun had fully set now, leaving the street bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. Shadows stretched across the pavement, but in that corner of the town, the darkness didn't feel threatening. Instead, it felt protective, like a small bubble where someone cared enough to stand with her, silently, without judgment. After a few minutes, she finally unwrapped the granola bar, taking a tentative bite. Jake watched her, nodding in approval, careful not to intrude, careful not to frighten her. Conversation flowed in small fragments, stories of life on the road, of towns he'd seen, of people he'd met. Never brags, never threats, just soft human voices connecting. "You're really nice," she whispered after a while, her lips curling into a tiny, genuine smile. "I don't think anyone's ever just stayed like this." Jake shook his head, a small laugh rumbling from deep in his chest. "Sometimes kindness comes from unexpected places," he said. "Don't forget it." For the first time in hours, maybe days, she felt safe. Not completely, not forever, but enough to breathe, enough to trust, even if only for a moment. And that was enough to start healing, one small act of compassion at a time. By the time night had fully settled over the town, the streetlights cast long, soft shadows on the empty sidewalks. The girl sat beside Jake, a little more relaxed now, sipping the last of her water. Her breathing was steadier, though the pain in her cheek throbbed with each movement. She had shared just enough of her story to unburden herself slightly, and Jake had listened without judgment, giving her a quiet space to process what had happened. "I don't even know your name," she said, finally breaking the silence, her voice small but curious. "Jake," he replied simply, the name firm yet unassuming. "And yours?" She hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Maya." "Nice to meet you, Maya," Jake said, his voice gentle. "You're stronger than you think." Maya glanced up at him, a mixture of surprise and uncertainty in her eyes. She had always felt invisible, like no one ever truly saw her. But Jake's words weren't pity, they were recognition. For the first time in a long time, she felt acknowledged. The distant roar of motorcycles reminded her that he had a world outside this quiet street, a life of freedom and danger that seemed so different from hers. Yet, here he was, a man feared by many, showing her patience and understanding. It was bewildering, and comforting. Why do you care?" she asked after a while, the question hanging in the night air. Jake paused, thinking. "Because everyone deserves someone in their corner," he said finally. "Someone who won't leave just because life gets messy." Maya nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. She had been left alone countless times before. Friends, relatives, teachers, always vanishing when things got complicated. But Jake wasn't going anywhere tonight, and that mattered more than she could explain. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "It's a number. If you ever need help, or even just someone to talk to, you can call." Maya's eyes widened. She had never had anyone offer her that kind of support. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Jake replied. "Just keep it. That's enough for now." For a few more minutes, they sat together in silence. The faint rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant hum of the freeway, the occasional bark of a dog, these sounds made the world feel alive, not threatening. Maya felt a tiny spark of hope flicker inside her, fragile but persistent. Finally, Jake stood, brushing dust from his jacket. "I should get going," he said. "But remember, Maya, you're not alone. And you're stronger than any bruise or fear." Maya watched him mount his bike, the engine rumbling to life. He gave her a small nod before riding off into the night, the headlights disappearing down the empty road. She sat there a while longer, the piece of paper clutched tightly in her hand, realizing that one unexpected act of kindness could change everything. That night, for the first time in a long time, Maya felt safe, and for the first time, she believed that someone out there genuinely cared. And somehow, that small truth was enough to keep her moving forward. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the quiet town, bathing the streets in warm golden light. Maya woke in her small, cluttered bedroom, still clutching the piece of paper Jake had given her. She stared at it for a long time, tracing the numbers with her finger, feeling a strange sense of comfort wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel entirely alone. Breakfast was sparse, just a piece of toast and a glass of milk, but even mundane routines felt slightly different now. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Jake, the biker with the rough exterior and unexpectedly gentle heart. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he had stayed with her, listened without judgment, and offered help without asking for anything in return. It was almost unbelievable. School was harder, her bruise was still visible, and whispers followed her down the hallways. Kids pointed, snickered, and some even laughed openly. Usually, she would have tried to disappear into the background, avoiding attention at all costs. But today, holding Jake's paper in her pocket, she felt a little braver. She kept her head high, moving past the stairs with quiet determination. During lunch, she sat alone under a large oak tree, nibbling at her sandwich, when she heard the sound of a motorcycle approaching. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up, half expecting to see another intimidating stranger. But it wasn't Jake. It was just the familiar roar of traffic passing by. Still, the memory of his presence lingered, giving her a strange sense of strength. After school, Maya took a longer route home, avoiding the main street where her father might be waiting. She stopped by a small park, watching children play, the laughter filling the air. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope for a normal life, a life where she didn't have to constantly brace herself for anger or pain. That evening, she finally mustered the courage to call the number on the paper. Her hands shook as she pressed the digits. Jake answered after a few rings, his voice calm and reassuring. "Hey, Maya, everything okay?" She hesitated, unsure if she should speak. But something in his tone made her feel safe. She told him about her day, about the whispers, the stares, the fear she had felt. Jake listened patiently, offering advice in his quiet, steady way. He didn't lecture, he didn't scold, he just reminded her that she wasn't alone and that she had the power to protect herself. By the time they hung up, Maya felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That night, she went to bed with a small smile, clutching Jake's note like a talisman. His unexpected kindness had created a ripple effect she couldn't ignore. Her heart, once heavy with fear and despair, now carried the fragile beginnings of hope and courage. For the first time, she realized that even in the darkest moments, people could be allies, protectors, and unexpected heroes. And she vowed to herself that she wouldn't let fear control her life anymore, not if Jake could see her worth in just a few short hours. A few weeks had passed since that evening on the curb. Maya's life hadn't magically transformed. Her father was still unpredictable, school still carried whispers, but something inside her had changed. The bruise on her cheek had faded, but the memory of Jake's presence remained, a quiet reminder that someone cared, that kindness could exist even in the roughest places. She began carrying his note with her everywhere, tucking it safely in her backpack. Whenever fear or doubt crept in, she'd read the numbers, feeling a strange courage build within her. One afternoon, she even made eye contact with a few classmates who had teased her before. She didn't smile openly, but she held her head high, letting them know she wouldn't be intimidated. Jake's calls had become a lifeline. They weren't long conversations, but they were consistent, sometimes advice, sometimes just listening. "You're doing great," he would say. "Keep moving forward, one step at a time." Simple words, but they carried weight she had never experienced before. One Saturday, she found herself standing outside the local diner, the small bell above the door jingling as she entered. She had promised herself she would take a small step, one that might seem insignificant to others, but huge to her. She sat quietly at a corner table, ordering a cup of hot chocolate. The barista gave her a friendly smile, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled back without hesitation. Later that evening, Maya returned home cautiously. Her father was pacing, muttering angrily to himself. Normally, she would have shrunk in the corner, trying to disappear. But today, she held herself differently. She had something stronger now, a sense of self-worth, a shield of courage built from small acts of trust and compassion. As she climbed into bed that night, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. The fear that had gripped her for so long wasn't gone, but it no longer controlled her. She thought of Jake, the leather-clad biker who had stopped, listened, and shown her that the world could hold unexpected allies. His act of kindness had sparked a transformation in her. A realization that she could survive, she could protect herself, and she could seek support when needed. The next morning, Maya woke with determination. She decided to start small, helping a classmate with homework, speaking up when she felt injustice, taking the long way home through safe streets, and slowly learning to trust herself. Every time doubt threatened to creep in, she touched the note in her backpack, remembering Jake's words. Weeks turned into months. Maya's bruise had long healed, but the emotional scars had begun to fade as well. She started to find friends she could trust, built routines that made her feel secure, and even joined the local community center for after-school programs. And though Jake was still a stranger in many ways, his influence lingered in every choice she made, every step she took toward independence and courage. One evening, she sat on the porch, the sunset painting the sky in warm hues. She smiled softly to herself, realizing that one unexpected act of compassion had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. And somewhere down a quiet Texas street, a biker rode on, unaware of the quiet heroism he had sparked in a young girl. Maya knew now that the world could be harsh, but it could also be gentle, and she was ready to face it.